put things like this on tonight, and we weren't able to do it for you guys for so long. So just enjoy, and we really couldn't be here without super talented people to my right, who I'll introduce in a second. Just a quick few thank yous to Riverbank that supplied some of the wine. The prints you'll hear about in a second. The paper's supplied by Ilford, and it's printed at Fitzgerald Photo Lab on Epson printers. And it's not a big selling event, but there are some specials on Epson if you insist on buying something this evening. See my brother. And yeah, so we couldn't do it without Howard. Did I thank everyone? Look, he's run off to the loo.
I think he ran up the stairs.
He's run up. Howard, easy. He's falling down. He's falling down. I thank Fitzgerald, Ilford, Epson, Riverbank,
Fuji,
and Fujifilm. So you'll hear a bit about Fujifilm cameras as well. But the real reason we're here is to hear about real photography, amazing work that a talented individual named Patrick Brown. Round of applause. Paula's clapping.
Yes, yeah.
So we couldn't be here without guys like you who've been supporting us, and even dealing with my brother and I, who we were very young, and supporting our dad. So Patrick has had this amazing career. You know, left Perth, and he's been all over the world shooting, and we're going to hear about his work. So Patrick, thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil.
This evening. Yes, I'll turn it.
It's kind of interesting because I've come full circle in a way, because I bought my first ever camera off Frank, and it was an OM10.
Did you say Frank?
Off the Frank.
Do you know Frank as well?
So it's kind of interesting. And just before I left to set sail for the world, my last job was actually working in this camera shop and Ron, he helped me out. He got me enough money together so I could get on the plane and get out of here. So it's kind of nice to come full circle, come back, and hopefully share some of the people I've met along the way, and some of the experiences I've had. So this quote that you see up here was first shown to me by Paula, who's sitting at the back. And unknowns to me at the time, it sort of defined my journey. Photography for me, I love the nerdiness of it, I love the gear, but for me it's a vehicle. It takes me to places and worlds that I wouldn't go. And the people I get to meet are outstanding people, in however you want to judge it on the parameters of good or bad. I get to experience their world for a sliver of time, and I bring that back and I try and show that to people, an audience such as yourself. And this journey for me started in some way in 1994 when I went to Malawi, a Central African state in 1994, yeah. And a surgeon had saved my life. And he sort of didn't also save my life, he changed my life. Because I was working in a multi-story car park in Fremantle, trying to put myself through art school and trying to be a photographer. And I read in the newspaper that he was a surgeon for 2.5 million people, the only Western trained surgeon. So I sold my car, my surfboard, and my black and white telly, and I went to Malawi with 26 rolls of black and white and 28 rolls of color. Didn't have a clue what I was doing. So yeah, he changed the trajectory of who's standing in front of you in some way. So I went through Malawi, just going about, taking pictures and discovering the place. And at the time, it was the last African nation, sub-Sahara, that was having multi-party elections. And I happened to be there for that, and it was a historical event, and for some unknown reason, I got pulled into the elections and the swearing-in ceremony, and it was an incredible journey for me. And these were all taken on a 1952 Rolleiflex, which I still have today. And it's one of my prized possessions. It's not as healthy as it was when I bought it, let me tell you that. So, Africa, and then this is Rob Whedon, brilliant West Australian surgeon. His first ever words to me were, "Son, we don't know what's wrong, we're going to have to open you up. I need you to sign here." And it was the most lucid decision I've ever made and the most lucid sentence I've ever heard. And it's kind of interesting relationship I've had with him is he's a father, uncle, big brother type figure, and an incredibly talented and humble guy, and he's a really sweet man. He would start his ward rounds in the morning, and then he would go into surgery, and he'd do between 5 to 10, possibly 15 operations, and then do a ward round in the evening after seeing what the patients have come out of surgery, and he wouldn't go to bed until about 11:30, and he'd just repeat and repeat. And I didn't go there I think I went there to find out who Whedon was, but also I went there to find out who I was, I think, at the end of the day. But I only have one picture of him, which is kind of ironic, as I find it very difficult to photograph people that are close to me. I don't know what it is. I've been trying to dissect that for years. I think it's a self-conscious thing. But people who don't know me, I just block them out, and I just focus on the task in front of me of documenting what's happening. So this is one of the operations that Rob is going to do. There was a power cut, so they moved the operating table out into the corridor. There's a 15-year-old boy who was quite badly injured in the leg. Then I returned to Perth, and I had an exhibition, and it was quite a success, and I realized that there's a power in an image. I didn't really understand that. I still don't, to some degree. But there was an exhibition, it brought awareness, and it brought money, and raised money for what Rob was doing, and I understood that the image does connect with people, and on a very fundamental level. And that narrative is sort of, again, back to it, I'm not interested in photographing new things, I'm interested in seeing new things. And then this led me to this project, Live Theatre. At RPH, two friends of mine had just returned from Romania, and they had come back with this incredible body of work, beautiful images. And I was jealous. It really fired me up to try and find something locally. And I sort of played with the idea of hanging out with the police, and it wasn't really what I was looking for. And then I approached Royal Perth Hospital. And after some time, we came to an agreement, and they gave me full access of RPH. And I don't know if that would be achievable today, but it was an incredible opportunity, totally off my own back and my own initiative, and that also drove my career. I get commissions and I get projects, but they fuel me for what I want to do, and that is the key thing. It's just I see the financial compensation for what I do, and I funnel that into the work that matters to me. And this is one of those. This was the first learning curve of this particular thing. I was only 24 when I started this project. I'd never seen anybody die before, but I'd never seen anybody so focused before. And it was a powerful moment, and they'd really tried to save this gentleman, but it was to no avail. And for me, how everybody is just staring so intensely at the monitor, waiting for a beep. I was in cardiology, and they gave me full access again. Everybody gave me full access. The only department, for obvious reasons and totally understandable, was the HIV ward. They were not comfortable with that, which I totally understand, totally respect. And all I needed to do was contact the head of department, and they would notify their staff and let me through. This was absolutely mind-blowingly fascinating. This was an open heart surgery. I don't know if anybody has had one or has anybody witnessed one, but the heart-lung machine is about the size of this table. And it's quite impressive that we as a species are able to compress that down into this cavity. Yet man, it's top of its science of it is it's a machine that is the size of one of these tables. It's an impressive feat.
Were these all on film?
Yeah, this is all film.
Yep.
All my black and white, even to this day, I shoot on film. I can't really make that jump from black and white in digital world. I just can't figure it out. So this is all film, yeah. All 400 ASA tri-X. This is a really sad story. There's a gentleman who was on holiday, young guy. I think he was in his mid-20s, we were about the same age. And he had taken a joyride in I think it was a World War II biplane. Anybody know the name of the aircraft? Tiger Moth. And the Tiger Moth lost engine power and it crashed. And he survived, and so did the pilot, but he broke his back. And I still vividly remember him when he was laid on the table in the emergency, and he was asking me if his toes were wiggling. And I just said to him, look, mate, I don't think you need to worry about that. Focus on the next 10 minutes, next hour. But those toes never wiggled ever again. This guy was a grumpy old bugger. But he was really allowed me into his world. He was getting over a heart surgery and he'd been struggling, and the surgery was a while ago, but he was in and out. But even though he was a grumpy old, I would be pretty grumpy if somebody ripped my chest apart and fiddled around with my heart. But he was so nonchalant about me being there. And I totally respect when somebody allows you into their world and it's the worst day of their life. There's a lot that goes with that, however you want to translate that. But to allow you into that world, most people shy away from it. But to open you up and say, this is me in the most vulnerable section of my period of my life, I tip my hat to you. And the staff were the same, they all embraced it. And I talked to somebody on the weekend who's I think a guest, or she's taking over the curating or looking after the art collection at RPH. And she said the collection is still up there for public viewing in the emergency corridor. And the doctors all like it because it's honest and it's clean, as I've been told. So and it was a very nice compliment that a doctor would say such a thing. Again, this is an autopsy. Kind of interesting. This was, I think it was taken on a full moon. The emergency staff, I was saying one day, it's very quiet. I spent, I think, a month and a half in emergency. That's another thing I would say to any young photographer or anything, is you've got to put in the time. These images don't come to you. You really have to put in the hard yards, and there's 99.9% of everything I take is a mistake. You really have to, you're constantly going down cul-de-sacs visually, and your narrative, and you've got to find your way in and out. You've got to put in the time. And this particular period was, I was saying it was a bit quiet, and she looked at a watch and said, wait until the weekend. And it was a full moon on a Friday, and holy moly, the place lit up. Drownings, car crash, overdoses, you know, murders, rapes. It was really quite insane. It was just a flood of things coming through the door. There was one guy, I was going to put the image in here, but I've got a picture of a guy's arm, just his arm, and it's his right arm, but he doesn't have a left arm anymore because that was pulled off in a winch on a ship. It was that type of Friday. It was just on board. It was full on.
Sorry, Pat. With so much of your early stuff being filmed with exposure, did you ever bracket or anything like that, or just?
There's not really time to bracket, mate. You can't bracket on one roll of film, on one frame, mate.
Yeah. So, how are you metering? Just out of the camera?
Well, luckily it's a hospital, so it's pretty neutral light all over. So it's just a handheld meter. I've always, even when I shoot DJ, I use handheld.
How do you store all these films now?
They're exposed ones. I shipped 175 kilos of exposed film to Copenhagen. They're in my bedroom. 175 kilos of exposed film. And that doesn't include the print. This looks a lot more dramatic than it is. But this is a guy who's trying his desperate to get a bed. And he's been, as you can see on his left wrist, he's already got a band, and he's been admitted, but he's not well enough. He's not sick enough for a bed, but he needs a bed. So he's pretending to be Jesus, I think. And this so this is cardiac. Set that I wanted to try and take further afield, and I worked in a kitchen, worked here. I did all sorts of work to try and get enough money together to get out of Perth. Ironically, I'm back here again. But this was the first really big project I did, and this took 10 years to do. And it's about the illegal animal trade. And I think I was the first photographer to work on the network. Most people had done the rhino trade or the pangolin trade or the gibbons or small trinkets, but I worked with two other guys, Adam Oswald and Ben Davis, and we worked on a book called Black Market, which was an NGO-style book, and then it led to this. I got a world press for this. This is my first world press. And this took me through. And this image to me is quite important because this is the first image I ever took of Burma. Burma is on the left and Thailand on the right. And I just got fascinated. I fell in love with the Shan Hills. I don't know if anybody knows where the Shan Hills is, but it's the Golden Triangle. Militia, drug trade, human trafficking, animal trafficking, villages, rice, famine, war, love, families, everything just lives up in those hills. And this is where my fascination with Asia began, was up there. It was the first place where the CIA ever did an operation, before the CIA were the CIA. The first opium drug lord that we would call a drug lord today was a lesbian princess. These hills are magical. They hold a million stories, and the illegal animal trade is one of them. This image actually it became I think the definitive image of the project. I didn't set out to do that. It grew its own life. But this elephant, if you and I were stood next to it, would come up to its eyes. It's the biggest mammal, biggest beast I've ever seen in my life. And he, at the time of the picture, which is going back a few years now, he was 50 years old. He'd already killed 2 mahouts, which are the elephant trainers. But because of his size, he was always kept on, and he could walk through the elephant grass with such clearance that there was no hindrance for the army or the rangers to do any patrols. And for me, this image just says what humans have done to animals. One of the greatest majestic beasts on the planet. We've hobbled it, and we've just obliterated its environment. That's what humans do. I'm not an activist. I'm standing here with a leather belt on and eat meat, but the corporate entity of the animal trade, we're talking about the 3rd biggest illicit trade in the world. The animal trade, Interpol put the figures at one stage between 52 billion and 342 billion. That means they don't have a clue how big the trade was. This fuels some of the most nasty people on earth. Not the poachers. The poachers are just doing what their parents have done. It's the middleman and the end result where the money goes. But this will give you the idea of the size of the elephant. I'm actually on the back of the big elephant, and I'm looking down on top. I've got a 24mm lens. That will give you some perspective of the size of that beast. All shot on a Rolly FM2 and an M6. FM2 to me is a magical camera. It's the Asian Leica, if you want to put it. If you've got one, hang on to it, or come and see me. This is in the mountains of southern Cambodia. That's his name, his age, the crime that he's committed, and obviously the date. This image is quite troubling to me because it's just echoing the Khmer Rouge, what the Khmer Rouge did to the intellects, the artists, by putting a sign around the neck and putting the crime. And this is how the Khmer Royal Forestry processed and did this. Ironically, they did escape in the night. I don't know how they did, but they got away. And they were thumb handcuffed behind the back. And so I can imagine like 4 guys walking through the forest backwards. But he's just trying to do something to get his family ahead. Tiger, he would get $250 for that tiger, but meanwhile the middleman would get $20 to $30, possibly $40,000. A tiger's worth more dead than alive. It's kind of weird, but to move a live tiger, they're very smelly, they're very big, and they're very angry. It's much easier to move a chainsaw cut-up tiger than a live one. And that's just put that ideology into the trade. It's a business. When we were working on this, these images were used in US Congress to show the US government what was going on. It was quite a proud moment, actually. but they were trying to find out who the smugglers were in Asia. The problem was when they were going to the arms, contraband, human trafficking, in all the big subjects. This is going back mid 2000s and mid 2000s. So they found a weak link. If you get caught with a rhino horn that's worth $5,500 on the black market, but if you were caught with $5,500 worth of heroin, you're going to jail for that heroin for a long, long time. For the rhino horn, you get a smack on your hand. Low risk, high yield. Every businessman is going to go down that way. And to this day, it's still the same. Low risk, high yield. These guys who are on the front line, I mean, they're fighting poachers with AKs. And they go hunting. At that period, they were hunting elephants with RPGs. It's a whole different ballgame.
Can you tell us what an RPG is?
A rocket propelled grenade. This was in Scotland Yard. I wasn't allowed to photograph the gentleman's face, but it wasn't intention at the time, but I liked how I beheaded a human and had the tigers. It was just a nice little coincidence at the end. But look at Scotland Yard. It's one of the biggest employees at the time, one of the biggest employers in Europe, and they had one person for the legal animal trade. By the time they got everybody in order and riled the troops, it was gone. I got to know my animal bits quite well actually. So at the front row you've got real tiger teeth, boar teeth, and then the ones at the back are just carved bone to look like tiger's teeth. Then you've got macaques, long-tailed macaques, and bigger ones at the back, and then there are a few horns. And they're all used as medicinal purposes. I really struggled with this part of the project, which was the bear bile. I wanted to photograph the bear bile industry, and it took me about 3 weeks to just get to know people. And I have a very big surgical scar, which Robert Whedon left me. And I convinced them that I was dying and I was looking for a medicine, and of course the bear bile would save me. And I found my way in, and I played with the ego, and I was able to get these photographs. The one thing that's interesting that I've discovered was, when I was photographing this, I was taking photographs surreptitiously, in the sense that I knew that they knew that I was photographing something that they didn't want me to see. So my body language was all cagey, and I just didn't work. They would pick up on me straight away, and I was just banging my head. And then I realized that I need to go in there with all gun blazing. So I went in there with a Red Bull t-shirt on, shorts, thongs, and my camera around my neck, and just played the dumb lost Aussie tourist. And they totally disarmed them, because I played that I didn't know what they were doing. And that's how it got me into the back of these shops, and I got to see some really incredibly sad things. This is a very rare female Burmese python, and half of the snake is actually going underneath the bench. And you can see the snout, or the nose, is taped up. And it's used for photographs in this border town and between China and Burma. A real Wild West town where everybody's got a pistol, everybody's gambling, and yeah, it's a Wild West town. The most trafficked creature in the world, the pangolin. The scales are supposedly be able to cure from a common cold right through to HIV, probably COVID now as well. I got a call from my contacted the customs at Bangkok Airport, and he said, we have a big shipment in, do you want to come and have a look? In this shipment there was 85 boxes, and inside were between 3 and 4 pangolins, all in deep ice, in hibernation state. And they were put down as turtles, and they got stopped at Bangkok Airport. The odds are that they didn't pay off the right people. This is kind of interesting, this will give you some scale of it. Singapore Airways, there was a cargo flight that was stopped at Hanoi Airport, and it was 6.5 tons of pangolins on board. Now 6.5 tons of anything is a vast quantity of size, just cubic size, right? So Singapore Airways got caught with this, and then the paper trail ended up back at a fax machine in an empty room in some building in Singapore. But the WWF took them to court because that could be 6 tons of humans, 6 tons of arms. Who was ticking that cargo? The sad thing about it all is the Vietnamese didn't know what to do with them, so they pushed them out onto the apron of the runway, and they all cooked to death, they all died. One of the most now really rare creature. That 6 tons of animals could have injected, a genetic gene pool. Anyway, a sad case. I always put this image into my talks because I always like the expression on the leopard's face. He looks at him like, if this bloody net wasn't here, mate, I'd have you. And zoos. I've got a real chip on my shoulder about zoos. That's probably why this body of work didn't get seen for a number of years. I don't like them. They're prisons. Yes, educational, all that sort of thing. But the Victorian style zoo, which that one is in Calcutta, is just to prod and poke and tease and make sure you entertain the humans. This is a family in Vietnam choosing their lunch. The image with that's a heart on a plate of that snake, and that snake's heart is still beating. And that's the blood and bile of that snake. Medicinal purposes and so forth. It just gives you a sense of what transpires on a daily basis. This is a restaurant in Guangzhou, and dragging a crocodile to its death. This, I wouldn't call it a temple, but it is known as the Tiger Temple outside Kanchanaburi towards the Burma Railway of Thailand. They always had a large population of tigers, but who were always making offspring and doing very well, but the population never increased. So what happened to those pups? That's what happens to those pups. They turn into entertainment. And this, I was going to have something a little bit more work to do within on the Thai-Burma border, but I decided to jump straight into my last big project, which was No Place on Earth, which is about 2017 Rohingya Crisis, which was ethnic cleansing, or it is ethnic cleansing. The UN has said textbook ethnic cleansing. The most difficult project I've undertaken. I went to Cox's Bazar. It's a very sliver land on the bottom end of Bangladesh, a sandbar if you would like, and across this estuary is Burma, and it's the closest point. Now, Noor Haban, she's 11 years old when I took this picture. One of the things that I will bring to, we'll talk about on this bit is I work with a translator and fixer. Usually I've got people around that I work with on a regular basis, and they're the ones that you're only as good as your translator fixer. These guys are the ones that get you to the front line, get you to where you need to go, and also manage the structure of getting the details off the people. Because taking a photograph is one thing, but having context to it just gives it a whole new level. And I work with two translators. I won't mention their names for just security reasons, but we had a great system. I would be photographing and I would just nod or poke and tell them to go get the names, who, what, where. And I spent a year trying to find this young lady, but we never did. We don't know what happened to her. So these boats were coming in with, there was 5 that came in over a period of about 15 minutes. And there would be about 30 to 40 people on them. And they were just coming in. They'd been at sea for 5 hours. There was 25 on board, 5 hours in open water in the Bay of Bengal. And I will mention the Bay of Bengal later, and this will give you some context to this. But Bay of Bengal in monsoon season, not a nice place to be. And this situation turned from 10 to 100, 500, 10,000, tens of thousands. Just thousands and thousands of people flooding across the border. Thousands. I try to, the analogy I use is if you were to, for example, say, stand in the middle of Hay Street on the busiest day, Christmas, before Christmas or whatever, the busiest day, just stand there. And everybody walking towards you is running away from death. It puts in a whole, it really grounds you very quickly. They're all escaping murder. There was 5 rafts that came across one day, and there was about 80 to 100 people on each raft. They were made out of bamboo, oil containers and tarpaulin, and the men are all on the perimeter while they paddled. I'm actually right up to my chin at this stage in this picture. And Burma is in the background, and what they did was they would match the time of the tide, so they would go out, so they would get pushed in and then sucked out, but not too far. You go into the Bay of Bengal on something like that, there's going to be a lot of people lost. Hussein, he's carrying his father, who's 60, who's blind. They've been walking non-stop for, I think it was 3 weeks. Yep, I've got 3 weeks in, walking non-stop, 3 weeks. And all they have is a bit of rice and some provisions that are in the buckets. And then they have to build a raft and get across that water, which is also further upriver. There was a multiple of Burmese positions, and they would triangulate and just use it as target practice. And if you're on an open raft made of bamboo and plastic oil drums, this image I got a World Press for. It doesn't rest very well on my shoulders even to this day. Don't get me wrong, I'm very proud of the attention that it brought to this incident, but nobody wants to get an award for a picture of dead children. But the award was never to me. And that's how I've dealt with it. The ward is actually what the judges felt best articulated the ethnic cleansing. This is innocence. This is not a bad picture. It's a picture of bad things. Now, ethnic cleansing, there is nothing clean about it. It's systematic, organized, well operated, executed murder. And that's those people being buried the next day. It's the innocence. They were so close to shore. They would have been able to see the lights of the shore. I'm just going to go back because I really didn't put this into context. The storm, it was a really bad storm. I could see it, and the sky was black. And it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock, and you couldn't see maybe 200 meters. The visibility was awful. Then it just got worse. And then I got a phone call from a friend of mine saying, we've heard of a boat overturning close to shore. It's about X amount of miles away from where we were. So we headed down there, and all I could think of is that the storm was so violent, so black, so intense, to the point where we were doing literally 15 kilometers an hour. We could not see the road. You're going into the Bay of Bengal in monsoon season. You're willing to risk your life of your children, your family, and everything. Imagine what you're running from. You're willing to put that on the table. Just imagine what you're leaving. And that's ethnic cleansing. That's the innocence that's taken. This looks like a very peaceful image, and I suppose in some way it is. I found this group of about 100 people, all sheltered around a very muddy ditch on the side of a road, all scrambling to clean some water and rest. They're in Bangladesh, of course. The lady on the right, she's a young mum. She's 25 years old, and that's her brother that's there. And they'd been walking for, let me just look at my notes here. They've been walking for 7 days non-stop, and halfway through that journey, and it's the day before I took this picture, is that, halfway through the journey she gave birth, but because she hadn't been eating really nothing of any nourishment, she couldn't feed the child. And the day before this picture was taken, she lost the baby, and it was her first baby. Her husband and her had been married for 5 years, and they've been trying. And her husband, she couldn't speak. She was just in shock. And her husband told us that he'd been to the hospital, the MSF hospital, and got some medicine and some water and bits and pieces. But he was just grateful that they had got out alive. But the poor lady, the psychological damage that's happened to her. This is early on in the crisis. It happened in August 26 was the first group of people, 2017, the first group came out, and then it just started building up, and I think this was early September. And they're scrambling for food, and the noise here, this scene, it's the best image I have, like really portrays it. But you can see the girl up at the back with her fingers in her ears. The noise was horrendous. There's literally about 2,500 kids screaming, shitting, peeing because they don't want to leave the queue. That place was hell. And they're trying to get some rice. This is a little bit later down in the track when the camp had set up. And in Cox's Bazar, it's the biggest refugee camp in the world, 1.2 million. It's as densely populated as Kowloon in Hong Kong. It's about the size of Copenhagen. No running water, no sewage, sporadic medical centres. Now the Bangladeshi government don't want to teach the kids. You have something like 60% of the refugees are under the age of 13. It's a prison. Each one of those shacks would probably have between 4 to 8 people in them, families. And they're blisteringly hot in summer and wet in wet season. As you can imagine, they're just built on muddy sandbars. And they're built of plastic, so they're an incredibly great fuel for fire, bamboo and plastic. So Hill is, at the time of this picture, was 7 years old. He was running away from the military, the Burmese military, and they opened fire. And in some way he was lucky. The round had come to pretty much the end of its velocity, but it entered underneath his arm, as you can see, and got wedged between his ribs. And he was able to, they were able to get it out, but they left some bits of shrapnel in there. And he was upset because he always fancied himself as a bit of a cricketer. Ahmed. I met this guy. This story is on a different level. So he's 15 years old, Ahmed. His village is in a lowland. It's surrounded, it's got some hills and a little river in the bottom. The troops are coming down the hill, and everybody runs up the opposite hill, and then the troops just open fire on them and just spraying the hillside. He got clipped, and the round just took his arm off, except it was still hanging on with all the tendons. And he's running with his uncle. At the time of this, his mother and his father and his brother and his sister were dead. But they weren't. They ran the other way, but it took him nearly 9 months to find out that his family was still alive, but they were still in Burma. Getting back to Ahmed. So they get over the riverbank, or get over the crest, and they go down the hill, and his uncle has got a very rudimentary knife, and he sharpens the knife on a pebble, on a fairly large stone, and then goes about chopping the rest of the tendons off. And then his uncle knows about leaves that have certain antiseptic qualities, and then they just ram the bone and the wound full of these leaves. They wrap it up, and he walks off, and he survives. He's actually a great kid. And I got to know him. I visited him a number of times, but this is when he just arrived at the hospital in Cox's Bazar, and they hadn't actually treated him at this stage. As you can see, there's no drip, nothing. He's about to, they're just going to figure out what to do. The bone was still protruding, and it was all shattered. It wasn't a pretty sight. But he asked me about Iron Man, because he wanted to have an arm like Iron Man, just like any 15-year-old boy. And that sort of rounds it to a point where the project was for UNICEF, and it was about children. And it takes me to this next section, which is the children. These are, as a journalist, as a photographer, as a researcher, we were somewhat, it sounds very callous, but we were frustrated because we couldn't tell we were only photographing the consequences of actions. We weren't able to photograph what's transpiring or what caused this. But the children drew it. And I really wanted them to have a voice in the book. But yeah, so the first one on the right, sorry, on the left, is drawn by a 7-year-old, then a 9-year-old, and then a 13-year-old. Now, there's a couple of ways you can look at this. This is either a collective memory. They've been told that by family members, or they've witnessed it. And these are tools that UNICEF use to sort of debrief and deal with the trauma of conflict. This is a very common tool to get the children to get that out. However you want to look at this, if it was a collective memory or an individual memory, that's in somebody's memory of a child. I was asked last week what are my... I don't have a favorite picture. Somebody asked me what my favorite picture was. I don't have a favorite picture. They're all quite special to me in some way, but these two images that are coming up next are quite important to me as a person. Nazul, what a gentleman. He passed away in August 2018, but he lived in a village called Tuli Tuli, which was where a massacre took place. And Tuli Tuli is on a bend of a river. You have on the high ground you have the Buddhist community, on the low ground you have the Muslim community. He used to be a Burmese signals operator, and he fell in love with a Rohingya lady, and he converted to Muslim. He became a Muslim, and he was the link, sort of like an ambassador, if you want to say, a liaisons officer between the Muslim world and the Buddhist world. And he was taken into custody the day before they attacked the village. And they told his family to stay in the house, and they were taken care of, but they put him right next to the radio room. And he knew all the call signs. His knowledge, and I'm really proud of this fact that I was introduced to him. I was the first person to find him, if you want to say. And his knowledge is being used in The Hague. His evidence is used in The Hague for war crimes. His timeline was spot on. He knew how many people were in the choppers, who was in the choppers, what rank they were, how much fuel they were bringing. He just memorized everything. And I questioned him or interviewed him over a period of 4 or 5 days, and I would try and find out if there was any holes in his argument, if his timeline was out, if he was, all these, you're trying to second, and he was never out. He was spot on. And he passed away, probably of tuberculosis. He was a smoker, but that's why I do what I do, for people like this. And then this leads me to probably one of the strongest individuals I've ever met in my life, Rajima. 20 years old. Her husband was separated. They couldn't find each other in the massacre and the attack on the village. She was rounded up with about 7 other women, And then she hid her son under her dress, and they discovered her son. They pulled the son out and crushed his skull in front of her, and then threw the child's body onto a fire. She witnessed that, 20 years old. Then she was taken into a bamboo house where the soldiers raped them countless times, and then they slit their throats. And they were so busy. There's a whole series of ladies that survived. They slit her throat, and you can see a little bit of a scar on her chin. And I got really close to Rajima, and I was really quite concerned about her speaking out publicly. And I went back numerous times with all the people, the ladies especially in this, asking if they really... I sat on those portraits for 6 months before I showed them. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing any more damage, putting them out. You know, their name is out there. And every one of them said, no, please, this needs to be known. But Rajima articulated beautifully. Beautifully is a word for this context. She said, look, Patrick, I know I'm paraphrasing it, but I know there's a world out there that's bigger than this refugee camp. I know there is people out there that I will never meet. And I know, and this is quite cute, this is how a mind thinks, I know there is places out there with cold air. She's never experienced cold air, never. Just thinking further afield, that's what I mean by that thought pattern. And I said, look, you know, this will be in record, it will go on the internet, it will be seen. And she said, look, why should I hide? I did nothing wrong. And I was looking at it as from a Western perspective. Is this might be the only justice, if you want to see, that she will get. But if I was in a position where this scenario was placed in front of me in the West, and a young girl had gone through the same thing and wanted her identity, her story to be told, why should I, with my Anglo-Saxon moral compass, dilute her argument, dilute her voice, you know, take that voice away from her? And people like those guys is why I do what I do. Thank you very much. On a beautiful note, on September 9, 2018, Rajima gave birth to a baby girl. And I asked her, she says, what happened in the past cannot be recovered by crying and crying. Rajima.
You happy to take questions from the
Yeah, please. Please.
Guys, I'll give a quick thank you, and then Pat's not going anywhere in a hurry, we're not going anywhere in a hurry, so take your time. So, huge round of applause and thanks to Pat. I was just saying to Patty earlier, I don't know how he does that and keeps his sanity, but it's amazing that he does, so that everyone else in our sheltered lives in places like Perth can actually be aware of all these things and bring it to light. So thanks, Pat. Guys, also Pat's got some books with him of Pat, remind me.
No Place on Earth.
No Place on Earth, and they are $100.
Yeah, they are 100. And
we've also got some beautiful Ilford fine art prints that Fitzsies have just done of Patrick's work yesterday. If anybody wants those, they're $3.69, and Pat will personally sign them out for you as well. There's just 10 prints here tonight, 5 different images. If there's anything else you want from Patrick's catalogue, let him know either through Pat or through us, and his books or his work, we can sort that out. He's hopefully around for the next month or two, a little bit to be determined with a couple of jobs, but yeah, we're not in a rush now. So feel free to ask Paddy any questions, ask us questions, grab another glass of wine, and thank you all for coming tonight.
Patrick, can I ask a question? What's your view, because you're probably more intimate with her, what's your view of Aung San Suu Kyi?
We made her. The West loved it. It was a very simple argument. It was a very simple narrative. There was the angel, and then there was the devils. We made her. She's the son of she's a daughter of a general. She comes from an army background. And what happened with the Rohingya was a product of that. I mean, she doesn't even mention them by name. It was a clearing operation, literally a clearing operation. So my personal views are irrelevant at the end of the day. It's more to do with how the Burmese people feel about it.
Can I ask about, you mentioned must have been quite a serious way to find and have a relationship with the couple of fixers, translators you had. How do you even, as a photographer, as a photojournalist, find someone like that?
Schools, people that are either other journalists or university students, and you find them. There was one girl that I worked with on the No Place on Earth, I worked with her purposely, so we would talk to women, and it was a much easier way to break into that. But yeah, you meet people through that mechanism. And my first translator fixer on No Place on Earth had no experience, but he spoke English, and I really... They knew what they were getting into. They lived there, they're locals, and they had a lay of the land, and their asset was undeniably the cornerstone of that body of work. I can't deny that, and I won't.
How do you calm yourself to take a shock? I've been in situations where it's a hectic situation, not anything like what you've done, and all my photos are just always, you can tell that I'm panicked, or yours seem dead calm.
Nothing else matters except what's in front of the camera for me. That's the peripheral things. Yes, I'm very aware of stuff that's going on and maybe danger or whatever, but what's happening within that frame, I'm constantly trying to figure out how to articulate, how to capture that narrative and articulate it in such a way that is digestible by people besides myself. And that is what I just stay focused. And when the camera's not up at my face, I'm looking for photographs. I'm looking for images. We call it taking your cameras for a walk and getting them out there, and that's what I do. So I wouldn't call it calm, but just focused. Because trust me, it's not calm all the time.
So do you find it hard, like when you go to a place like a refugee camp, and then you come back to Perth where we're kind of living this affluent lifestyle, and the things we worry about seem rather insignificant compared to the dramas that these other people are trying to survive?
Yes. When you see an 8-year-old child die of measles, and then people here, or people in the West, are complaining about not having vaccinations, or, I know it's a very sensitive subject at the moment, but watch a 9-year-old, not an 8-year-old child die of measles. That will fucking wake you up.
Yeah, Sebastian Salgado famously said that his work was killing him, the kind of work you do. You're surviving. Do you have a process, or is it a personality factor, do you think, that keeps you going?
What do you mean by killing? Financially?
He said his doctor told him he was literally dying, presumably from the stress and so on of doing what you do. And he stopped for a long time, and then he started projects like his Genesis project.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I went to Asia with red curly hair. So, yeah, yeah, it does take it out of your sails. But this question comes up a lot. as I said, it's part of meeting these people. If the worst thing I do is actually I come back and I come back to a place where I can have running water out of a tap. It's not my life. It's not my existence. I'm a visitor. And that's how I try and balance it. Yes, they do. If it didn't affect me, then I would see a therapist. If that doesn't affect you, then you really need to speak to somebody. Yeah, it affects me, and I've got great support from my family and my friends.
Thank you.
And
Patrick, so you found Copenhagen now. Are you enjoying it there? What's the attraction to living there?
love. I married a Dane. I married a Danish lady. So, yeah.
Great cycling paths.
Great cycling paths.
175 kilos of film.
Yeah.
I've seen pictures of you taking these Rohingya villages. I was personally involved in massacre clearing in Africa, and I've taken pictures. But then they're very gruesome, very gruesome, because people were killed with machetes. It's not very sad, but you mentioned something about the psychological effects on them. In my case, it was somewhere about 45 years ago. And I still sometimes get the flash of that image, and I wake up in a shake.
Yeah, same here.
Do you go through anything like that?
Yes. But I haven't witnessed what you witnessed. I have photographed a lot of that. But it sounds very pretentious and a bit. It was the responsibility that I felt I needed for these people. Just weighed heavy on my shoulders. I didn't realize what I got myself into. They opened up to me, and they wanted me to tell the world. And I didn't quite understand that responsibility until it hit me in the face.
At the start of the talk, you said that you're trying to learn who you are with your work. So at the moment, right now, what have you learned, or are you still learning who you are?
I think if you stop teaching yourself or stop learning, then you're in the ground. I don't know who I am. I think I do know who I am, but it's for other people to judge, not me.
Speaking of people, do you have any faith left in us, or after those, especially apart from the RPH one, do you look at the human race and go, why are we here?
Humans, dumb as a bag of hammers. They, yeah, I do. There's some incredible people in this world. We mentioned a few of them tonight. Really powerful individuals who show me pure strength. A grill, a keel, or a mast of character. Yeah, I do have faith in them. Rajima has survived. She has a baby girl, and she's trying to move forward. And that's some seriously strong individual. Yeah, that gives me a lot of strength and a lot of hope.
It must be polarising, right? Because the other side of the same coin is the downright evil.
This came up the other day. Evil, I don't like that word. And the reason I don't like it is because that's where the subject finishes. That's not evil, is like something out there that religious. This is systematic ethnic cleansing. It's murder. When anybody puts evil to something, the conversation stops. And yes, it is wrong. It's all those things. But we need to move on from this black and white world that we live in. It's not evil. It's well thought out and mechanized murder in that particular case. And that's what we need to talk about. How did they get the skill set? Who gave them the bullets? You know, we need to take that conversation to a bigger sphere than just saying it's evil. And then we can start to look at ourselves a little bit clearer as a species. And I think my little pet theory is humans really need to if we want to survive climate change, wars, financial structures, we need to think as a species and not as packs. It's my little pet theory. The trading to extinction was that was horrifying as well. That's a genocide. That's a genocide, but of animals. We need to think as a species and not as individuals. And have a socialist, I might get shot down here, but a socialist democracy where where people care about the community that they're in and the community cares about them. My little two bobs within this whole thing.
You still feel positive that your work, you know, what you photograph and what you share, has brought at least a light or a positive light to some of these things so that some change occurs?
There's a group of people here who haven't heard this. Yeah, I think it does.
You've mentioned a lot of the people about that last lady that you've kept in touch with, that you've photographed. There's a lot of them over time, of course. Have they been pretty grateful for what you've brought to them?
I didn't bring anything to them. I took from them. And maybe that's getting back to your question there. Maybe that weighs on my shoulders. They entrusted me with their story, and I took that and I brought it out to the world. Collectively, I think I did bring something to them. I brought awareness. I was working for UNICEF, so there was food, there was medicine, there's education, security, all those parameters. But them as individuals, probably they wouldn't see that as a direct connection. But I hope I do. I hope I do.
Patrick, you talked about your black and white or film. Your colour images that were on there, were they some film or digital?
No, that was Dig.
Yeah, and what sort of equipment do you use?
That was beginning. That was a Canon Mark II 5D. But the landscapes and portraits was shot on the Fuji GFX, which really, I think, took it to a slightly different level. It just had, I think it really slowed down, and it was a different process. The GFX is a beautiful camera for that. I treat it like my Rolleiflex. When I started off with FM2s, I'd have a 35-28 on these shoulders, and I'd have the Rolleiflex in the bag, and the Rolleiflex is my landscape portrait camera. And I do the same. I got two Canon bodies, and I only use two lenses, and then the Rolleiflex. Oh, sorry, Freudian slip, Fuji.
Patrick, earlier you talked about doing commissions and whatever jobs to fund projects that you're interested in. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the progression from there through to working for UNICEF. And because I see amazing work like yours, I think, yeah, Steve, how do you make a living out of that? You do projects and then you said, I think somewhere along the line, that brings in work.
Well, it doesn't bring in work, but it pays for me. Okay, so the No Place on Earth, that was, there's no way I could have done that without the support or the mechanism of UNICEF. Just on a daily base, and I was there, I went over a period of 13 months, I was there, I think maybe 10, 12 times. So you're looking at, this will just give you an idea of cost. This is what something like this costs to to build, right? So hotel, $130, driver, $100, translator fix, $150, food, another bit, and that's before you've even taken a picture. So you're dropping, roughly, about 500 US a day, and you're there for 30, 40 days. So that financial support, you can't produce this body of work without that type of support. It's just unachievable.
But you went from the project in Malawi, which you did off your own back, and you showed the images and you said they were successful.
Oh, so yeah.
Or people said, that's great work, Patrick, can you go and do this project?
Yeah, it did actually do that. No, sorry, I misunderstood your question. Yeah, it did. I started working for the West Australian magazine, and Steve Schofield started commissioning me, and it went on from there. They did a spread of this work. I had an exhibition. They did a spread of the stuff from Rob Whedon, and it went from there. And yeah, it did open doors, and people could see what I was capable of. And I think in anything creative, you need to invest in yourself. You need to invest that. No editor is going to come to you and say, oh, we'd love you to go off to Africa for 5 months to the Serengeti, and no, that's not going to happen. You need to develop your style and how you work and how you communicate. You need to. It's your voice that makes the individual voice of each photographer is what the editor's looking for. Not because you can take a nice landscape or a nice portrait. They're looking at how you communicate from what you see slightly differently from most photographers. Your connection with your subject matter.
So did you pitch ideas to editors or whatever?
Oh yeah, I'm pitching ideas all the time.
Yeah.
Or even to this day, I'm working on projects. There's a couple of things I've got in the pipeline. So yeah, you're constantly working on ideas and researching. I'm always researching, always looking for story ideas and teaming up with a writer. I've just like 3 or 4 writers I'd like to work with. I don't like to work with too many other people. And you just build and say, look, we've got this, how you like this, and you go from there. It's a very personal relationship I have with my editors. And I think in this world of the internet, people think it's actually a remote, you work in a bubble. You do work in a bubble, but the relationship we have with your editor, it needs to be a very personal one. I talk to my editors, sometimes once or twice a week, or what are you working on? What is the publication working on in the future? Because you need to know where their visual arc and narrative is going as well.
You have an agency that represents you? Sorry, that was the last one.
Yeah, Panos Pictures.
Okay.
They represent me globally.
So your pictures to me are so raw and honest, but I kind of worry about the future when technology, we may not be able to believe an image that we see because technology will be able to manipulate images, and I kind of wonder if that scares you as a photographer who brings honesty.
Okay, we live in a post-truth world. Yeah, these images and the images that these people, my colleagues, our colleagues, do makes it more important. What makes it important is not that the image, but the editors know of my lineage, where I'm coming from, and they trust me. That is that personal relationship I was talking about. Yes, images can be faked and doctored, and people do get caught out, and rightly so. But they're going to trust that person over somebody else, and that is where that argument becomes incredibly important. Is the trust that you have that that person is not going to doctor it. If I was to doctor an image, all that would be thrown out of the water. Yeah. Regima people would just pull me apart, and rightly so. But all those people that put their faith in me, So you've got to, that makes images that I do and what my colleagues do more important. I don't think it dilutes it. Actually makes it. I think it makes it stronger.
We might turn the lights on. I invite you to actually come and have a look at Patrick's prints, and you'll see the depth of them. And talk to me about his book. He's only got a few left that are available at the front. Thanks again, Patrick.
Thanks very much.